Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to another exciting and insightful episode of the English Globe. I'm Adam, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Julia. We're really happy that you're spending time with us today to dive deep into one of the most important global topics of our time. This episode is not just a conversation, it's a journey through politics, diplomacy, and global peace. So, grab your headphones, sit back, and let's begin.
Hello to all our wonderful listeners around the world. Whether you're listening from the heart of New York City, a quiet town in India, or maybe even from a cafe in Europe, we're thrilled to have you with us. Today we are going to explore a very serious and controversial subject: the Iran nuclear deal. It's a topic that touches not just Iran or the United States, but the whole world. And it's more than just about nuclear technology. It's about trust, power, peace, and the future of international relations.
Now, if you've ever heard about the Iran nuclear deal, but weren't really sure what it means or why it's constantly in the news, don't worry. You're in the right place. We'll break it down step by step, explain the background, the key players, what was agreed, and most importantly, what it means for the future. This deal isn't just about uranium or weapons. It's about whether global diplomacy can work or whether conflict is simply delayed, not avoided.
Exactly, Adam. In our world today, where countries are more connected than ever, understanding big international agreements like this one is important. Why? Because decisions made by world leaders can affect fuel prices, international flights, global peace, and even the economy of smaller nations. The Iran nuclear deal is not just a political conversation. It's something that affects ordinary people too, even those who might think they are far away from the situation.
That's why we chose this topic, the Iran nuclear deal, peace or delay. Because we believe it's a question many people are silently asking. Was this deal really a path to peace? Or was it just a temporary delay before more problems and conflicts arise? As we go through this podcast together, we'll talk about the background, the deal itself, the reactions from different countries, and what might happen next. We'll share facts, opinions, and help you understand both sides of the argument.
And now, dear listener, before we go further, we'd love to ask you for a small favor. If you find this podcast helpful or interesting, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe on YouTube. It helps us reach more people who want to improve their English while learning about the world. Your support keeps us going and encourages us to bring more educational and thought-provoking content your way every week.
Also, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments below, where are you listening from? Are you in a busy city or a quiet village? Are you a student, a professional, or just someone who loves international affairs? And more importantly, what do you think about today's topic? Do you believe the Iran nuclear deal was a true step toward peace? Or do you think it was just a way to delay bigger conflicts?
Let's turn this into a real global conversation. Your opinion matters, and we want to read your thoughts. Remember, this podcast isn't just about Adam and me talking. It's about building a community of curious learners and global thinkers. Whether you agree or disagree with the points we make, your comment can help someone else see things from a different angle. So don't be shy. Jump in and be part of the discussion.
Now that we've set the stage, let's begin our journey. In the next section, we're going to dive into the history of Iran's nuclear program, when it started, and why the world became concerned about it. Understanding the past is key to understanding the present. So stay with us, because the story is about to get very interesting. We promise this won't be boring. It's like a political thriller, but it's all real.
That's right. And don't forget, this podcast is designed to help you learn English too. So as you listen, try to repeat some phrases out loud. Think about the vocabulary we're using and how we structure our sentences. It's a great way to improve your listening and speaking skills while learning about international issues. Okay then, dear listeners, take a deep breath, open your minds, and let's begin the real story behind the Iran nuclear deal right after this short break.
So, let's now look at how Iran's nuclear journey really began. Many people are surprised to learn that Iran's nuclear program was not born in secret or with conflict. It actually began with the help of the United States in the 1950s. Yes, that's right. Under a program called Atoms for Peace, the U.S. supported countries like Iran to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. At that time, Iran was ruled by the Shah, who was a close ally of the West and had strong diplomatic ties with the U.S.
The Shah's government saw nuclear energy as a sign of progress and modernization. Iran had big ambitions, plans to build over 20 nuclear power reactors, train nuclear scientists, and become a leader in peaceful nuclear technology in the region. The US gave Iran its first research reactor and provided nuclear fuel. This partnership continued into the 1970s. But the situation changed dramatically in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution removed the Shah and replaced him with a new Islamic government.
The revolution was a turning point. The new leadership under Ayatollah Khomeini was deeply anti-Western. Relations with the United States collapsed, especially after Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held American diplomats hostage. In response, the U.S. broke diplomatic ties with Iran and imposed tough sanctions. Western support for Iran's nuclear program ended, but Iran continued its nuclear work, sometimes openly, sometimes secretly, and that secrecy caused increasing concern worldwide.
Iran always claimed that its nuclear work was peaceful. It said it wanted nuclear energy for electricity and medical purposes like cancer treatment. But many countries, especially the US and Israel, feared Iran was using peaceful technology as a cover to build nuclear weapons. Enriching uranium, for example, can be used to power a reactor or to make a bomb. The line between peaceful and military use is very thin, and Iran's lack of transparency made the world suspicious of its true intentions.
Things became even more serious in 2002. Iranian opposition groups revealed 2 secret nuclear facilities, one in Natanz and another in Iraq. These sites had not been declared to the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, which is responsible for inspecting nuclear programs and making sure they follow international rules. This revelation created shock around the world. Why would Iran hide these sites if its intentions were peaceful? The trust between Iran and the international community was deeply shaken.
The IAEA demanded access and inspections. Iran allowed some, but the process was slow and filled with arguments. Meanwhile, evidence was building that Iran was working on advanced centrifuges and enriching uranium beyond what was needed for civilian purposes. At the same time, Iran's leaders insisted they were not building a bomb. They pointed to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, which allows countries to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. Iran said, "We have rights under the NPT."
That's true. Under the NPT, countries can develop nuclear energy, but they must also allow inspections and prove that they are not building weapons. Iran claimed the West was being unfair, applying double standards. For example, Israel is believed to have nuclear weapons, but is not part of the NPT. Iran said, "Why is the world okay with that, but not with us having nuclear energy?" This argument became central to Iran's position. But the international community wasn't convinced and wanted stronger guarantees.
In the mid-2000s, the tension escalated. The United Nations Security Council passed several resolutions demanding that Iran stop enriching uranium and fully cooperate with the IAEA. When Iran refused, the UN imposed sanctions. Then the US and the European Union added even more sanctions, blocking Iran's banks, oil exports, and international trade. These sanctions hit Iran's economy very hard. Inflation skyrocketed, unemployment increased, and ordinary people began to feel the pain in their daily lives.
Despite the pressure, Iran didn't back down. In fact, it expanded its nuclear work. It built underground facilities to protect its equipment from airstrikes and continued developing new types of centrifuges. Iran said the West was trying to control its independence and limit its scientific progress. This period became a dangerous cycle. More enrichment led to more sanctions, which led to more defiance. At the same time, the fear of war grew. Israel warned it might strike Iran's nuclear sites if diplomacy failed.
Cyber attacks also became part of this shadow conflict. In 2010, a computer virus called Stuxnet, believed to be developed by the US and Israel, damaged Iran's nuclear equipment. It was the first known cyber weapon to target a nation's infrastructure. This signaled a new type of warfare, one that doesn't use missiles or bombs, but code and technology. Iran responded by increasing its security and doubling down on its right to nuclear research. Trust on both sides continued to crumble.
But diplomacy didn't stop. From 2003 to 2012, European countries, especially Britain, France, and Germany, known as the EU3, tried to mediate talks between Iran and the West. Some progress was made, but each breakthrough was followed by setbacks. Iran agreed to suspend enrichment at one point, but restarted it later. Each side accused the other of acting in bad faith. And all the while, the technical progress in Iran's program continued. It was like watching a slow-motion crisis unfold.
Then, in 2013, something unexpected happened. Iran elected a new president, Hassan Rouhani, who promised a more open and diplomatic approach. He said Iran wanted to repair its image and make a deal with the world. At the same time, the US had President Barack Obama, who believed in diplomacy and said he wanted to prevent Iran from getting a bomb without another war in the Middle East. These two leaders created a new chance for negotiations, and for the first time, the possibility of a real agreement felt close.
Secret talks began between Iran and the US, and soon after, full negotiations started in Geneva and Vienna with the world's major powers, known as the P5+1, the US, UK, France, China, Russia, and Germany. The goal was simple on paper, but difficult in reality. Reduce Iran's nuclear capabilities, ensure strong inspections, and give Iran relief from sanctions in return. The talks were intense, emotional, and historic. After more than a decade of conflict, there was finally serious hope.
And that leads us to the year 2015, when the deal was finally signed. But before we dive into the terms of the deal itself, what was agreed, who gained, and who opposed, it's important to remember everything that led up to that moment. This was not just a policy change. It was the result of decades of mistrust, ambition, fear, and hope. A complex web of science, security, politics, and pride, all coming together in one of the most important international agreements of our time.
So the next time someone talks about the Iran nuclear deal, don't just think of it as something recent. It's the latest chapter in a very long and complicated story. A story that began with friendship, shifted into conflict, and slowly made its way back to diplomacy. In our next section, we're going to break down the details of the 2015 deal itself, what Iran agreed to, what the world gave in return, and why this agreement was praised by some and attacked by others. Stay with us, because the heart of the deal is coming next. Let's now step into the heart of our story, the 2015 nuclear deal, officially known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. After years of mistrust, sanctions, and secret talks, Iran and 6 world powers, the US, UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China, reached a landmark agreement in July 2015. This deal was historic, not just for its content, but for what it represented: diplomacy between enemies, a rare moment of cooperation between Iran and the West.
So what exactly was in this deal? The JCPOA aimed to block all of Iran's paths to building a nuclear weapon, at least for the next 10 to 15 years, while still allowing Iran to keep a peaceful nuclear program. In exchange, Iran would receive massive sanctions relief, unlocking billions of dollars in frozen assets, restoring oil exports, and reconnecting to the global banking system. It was a trade. Limit your nuclear activities and we'll lift the pressure on your economy.
One of the most important parts of the deal focused on uranium enrichment. Before the deal, Iran had around 20,000 centrifuges, which are machines used to enrich uranium. Under the JCPOA, Iran agreed to reduce that number to around 5,000 older model centrifuges. These machines would be used only for peaceful energy production and not to reach weapons-grade levels. The goal was to make Iran's breakout time, the time needed to build one nuclear bomb, at least 1 year.
Another key element was the uranium stockpile. Iran had a large amount of enriched uranium, which could be further enriched to make weapons. The deal required Iran to cut its stockpile by 98%, down to just 300 kilograms of low-enriched uranium. That's far below the level needed for a bomb. Not only that, but Iran also agreed to ship out its excess uranium and halt any enrichment beyond 3.67%, which is enough for energy use, but far below weapons-grade levels.
The deal also addressed Arak, Iran's heavy water reactor. This facility had the potential to produce plutonium, another material used in nuclear weapons. Under the JCPOA, Iran agreed to redesign the Arak reactor so that it couldn't produce weapons-grade plutonium. The original core was removed and filled with concrete. In short, the deal aimed to shut down every possible path to a bomb, either through uranium or plutonium. That was a huge win for the global non-proliferation movement.
But perhaps the most important feature of the JCPOA was inspections. Iran agreed to allow unprecedented access to its nuclear facilities by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. Inspectors could visit sites regularly, monitor uranium production, and install surveillance equipment. The IAEA also had the power to request access to any suspicious military sites, though Iran had the right to challenge such requests. Still, the inspection regime was considered the most intrusive in history.
Now, let's talk about what Iran got in return. The biggest benefit was economic. Years of sanctions had crushed Iran's economy. Its oil exports dropped, foreign investments disappeared, and inflation soared. With the JCPOA, billions of dollars in frozen Iranian assets were released. Iran was allowed back into the SWIFT international banking system. Oil sales restarted, and companies from Europe and Asia began exploring deals in Iran. For Iran's economy, this was a breath of fresh air.
It's important to understand that this wasn't a deal based on trust. It was based on verification. The world didn't simply believe Iran. It put strict limits in place and created ways to check if Iran followed the rules. That's what made the deal different from past negotiations. And that's also why many diplomats called it a win-win situation. Iran kept its dignity and peaceful nuclear rights. The West reduced the risk of war. And the world got greater visibility into Iran's activities.
Of course, not everyone celebrated. In fact, the JCPOA sparked huge debate around the world. Some countries, like Israel and Saudi Arabia, opposed it from the start. They said the deal didn't go far enough, that it only delayed Iran's nuclear ambitions instead of ending them. Critics argued that once the restrictions expired, after 10 or 15 years, Iran could resume its program and be even stronger. They saw the deal as buying time, not solving the problem.
Inside the United States, the deal was also controversial. President Obama and his team called it a diplomatic triumph, But many Republicans in Congress strongly disagreed. They said the deal gave too much to Iran and too little to the world. Some feared Iran would use its new economic strength to support terrorist groups or build influence across the Middle East. The vote in Congress was tense. In the end, Obama didn't need congressional approval to implement the deal, but it created political divisions.
And inside Iran, the reactions were mixed too. Many ordinary Iranians welcomed the deal. They were tired of sanctions and wanted economic relief. They hoped the JCPOA would open Iran to the world. But some hardliners in Iran's government and military were suspicious. They said the West could not be trusted and warned that opening the door to inspections could weaken national security. Still, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, gave cautious approval for now.
So the deal was signed, the sanctions were lifted, and for a short while there was a sense of hope. Iran reduced its nuclear activities, and the IAEA confirmed its compliance multiple times. Oil flowed again. Diplomacy was working. But underneath that success, the divisions remained. Critics were waiting for any mistake. Supporters hoped the deal would grow into something bigger. The world held its breath, wondering whether this moment of cooperation would last or collapse.
And that brings us to the next chapter. Because just a few years later, everything changed. In 2016, the U.S. elected a new president, Donald Trump, who had a very different view of the deal. He called it the worst deal ever and promised to tear it up. In our next section, we'll dive into the consequences of the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA. What happened when the world's most powerful country suddenly walked away? The hope of peace began to fade, and the risk of conflict returned. As soon as the deal was signed in July 2015, headlines around the world exploded with both praise and fear. Some leaders called it a historic achievement for diplomacy. Others saw it as a dangerous compromise. But in those early months, there was something that hadn't existed for a long time between Iran and the world, a small spark of hope. The deal had actually happened. The papers were signed. The restrictions began. And for the first time in years, the threat of war in the Middle East seemed just a little further away.
Indeed, Adam. In cities across Iran, you could feel cautious optimism. Shops opened with fresh products imported from abroad. Foreign diplomats visited Tehran, and international companies started looking at deals for energy, telecom, aviation, and technology. After years of isolation, Iran's economy seemed ready to breathe again. You could see it in the eyes of young Iranians, many of whom had never known a time without sanctions. They believed this deal could bring jobs, internet freedom, cultural exchanges, and a better future.
And it wasn't just about economics. Many Iranians hoped the deal would be the start of something bigger, a way to rebuild bridges with the West and reduce the image of Iran as a threat. They wanted to be part of the global community, to travel, to study abroad, and to build a peaceful future. On the other side, leaders in Europe and the U.S. felt proud of the negotiations. Diplomats who spent long nights in Vienna and Geneva finally saw their hard work pay off. There was a belief that dialogue had worked, not bombs.
President Obama gave powerful speeches defending the deal, saying it made the world safer. He argued that diplomacy had stopped Iran's nuclear program without firing a single shot. He admitted that the deal wasn't perfect, but emphasized that it was better than no deal at all. His administration said, "We cannot base our policy on hope alone, but on inspection, verification, and transparency." He believed the JCPOA could serve as a model for solving other global conflicts peacefully.
European leaders, including those from Germany, France, and the UK, also stood behind the agreement. They believed it would open new doors for trade, reduce nuclear threats, and strengthen the global non-proliferation regime. Even China and Russia, often at odds with the West, saw value in the deal. The fact that these 6 world powers could agree on something so complicated was a diplomatic miracle. The JCPOA wasn't just a win for one country. It was a rare moment of global cooperation.
But not everyone shared this optimism. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was furious. He stood before the US Congress and gave a passionate speech saying the deal was a historic mistake. He claimed it only delayed Iran's path to the bomb and would give Iran more money to fund terrorism across the Middle East. In Saudi Arabia, officials remained silent at first, but behind closed doors, they too feared that Iran would use its new resources to strengthen regional influence and create more instability.
And inside Iran itself, while many people were hopeful, hardliners remained deeply skeptical. Powerful groups within the Revolutionary Guard believed the US would never truly keep its promises. They feared the inspections would turn into spying, and that allowing access to military sites would threaten national security. They also worried that opening Iran to the West would bring in foreign culture and values that could weaken the Islamic Republic. So even as the deal was implemented, there was internal resistance.
The implementation of the deal also came with technical challenges. Iran had to dismantle thousands of centrifuges, dilute or export most of its enriched uranium, and redesign the Arak reactor. This process had to be verified by the IAEA. While Iran moved quickly to meet its commitments, there were delays and disputes about how to handle some sensitive areas. And even though sanctions were lifted, many Western companies hesitated to return to Iran because of fear that sanctions could come back later.
That hesitation was very real. Major banks and international corporations were still nervous about dealing with Iran. U.S. sanctions linked to human rights, terrorism, and ballistic missiles were still in place. This created confusion and legal risks. As a result, the economic benefits of the deal didn't arrive as fast as many Iranians had hoped. People began to wonder, if we kept our promises, why is the world still so cautious? This question slowly began to weaken the public's faith in the deal.
Meanwhile, inside Washington, D.C., political tension over the deal never fully went away. While the Obama administration worked to protect the JCPOA, many members of Congress promised to reverse it. Some said the inspections were not strong enough. Others believed the sunset clauses, provisions that expired after a few years, were too risky. The fact that Iran could eventually resume more nuclear activity made critics worry that the deal simply delayed the problem instead of solving it for good.
And while Iran was following the nuclear limits, it continued to develop its ballistic missile program. The deal didn't cover missiles, and this allowed Iran to keep testing them. Critics used this as a key argument, saying the deal failed to address the full range of Iran's military ambitions. On the regional front, Iran was still supporting militias in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, which made countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia more nervous. They asked, how can this be called a peace deal?
So, in these first couple of years, the deal was alive, but under constant pressure. Supporters pointed to IAEA reports showing Iran was complying. They said, it's working, let's protect it. Opponents said, Iran is playing a long game and will be more dangerous later. It was a fragile peace, a kind of international balancing act, and even a single political change could tip the entire structure over. That political change came soon after, in the 2016 US presidential election.
That election changed everything. A new administration with a very different approach to foreign policy took power. President Donald Trump had been clear from the beginning. He hated the deal. He believed it was weak, dangerous, and full of loopholes. He promised to pull the U.S. out of the JCPOA and reimpose maximum pressure on Iran. For the world, this raised a serious question. What happens when one of the main players suddenly changes the rules of the game?
Before we move on to the next section, let's pause for a moment and ask our listeners, what do you think? Was the Iran nuclear deal, in its early days, a true step toward peace? Or were the warnings from critics valid even back then? Did the deal really change anything, or was it just a temporary pause in a long-running conflict? Share your opinion in the comments. Your thoughts can help others see different sides of this complex issue, and that's how we all grow together.
In the next part of this story, we'll walk you through what happened when President Trump decided to withdraw from the deal. We'll look at the reactions from Iran, the European powers, and the rest of the world. We'll see how trust was broken once again, and how that changed the course of the entire Middle East. So stay with us, because the story is about to take a dramatic and dangerous turn in Section 5. U.S. withdrawal under Trump, the turning point. In 2016, the United States elected a new president, Donald J. Trump, who promised to take a hard stance on Iran. Even during his campaign, Trump called the Iran nuclear deal the worst deal ever negotiated, and made it clear that he would not honor it. He believed that the JCPOA had given Iran billions of dollars in relief while allowing them to remain a threat in the region. And unlike the Obama administration, Trump did not believe in diplomacy as the main tool for handling Iran.
As soon as Trump entered office, his foreign policy team began reviewing the JCPOA. Internally, the administration was divided. Some officials believed the US should stay in the deal and try to fix its flaws. Others, like then National Security Advisor John Bolton and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, argued that Iran could never be trusted and that the only way forward was to leave the deal completely. Trump sided with the hardliners and began preparing for withdrawal.
On May 8, 2018, President Trump stood at a podium in the White House and made a formal announcement. The United States was withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal. The reaction was immediate and intense. Trump said the deal had failed to stop Iran's missile program, had allowed Tehran to spread chaos in the Middle East, and had sunset clauses that would expire too soon. He promised a new strategy, maximum pressure, which would include the toughest sanctions Iran had ever seen.
Within minutes of the announcement, global reactions poured in. European allies, Britain, France, and Germany, expressed deep regret and disappointment. They believed the deal was working and that Trump's move would destroy years of careful diplomacy. Iran's leaders were angry but not surprised. For months they had warned that the US could not be trusted, and now their worst fears were becoming real. Still, Iran said it would stay in the deal for now if the other countries could keep it alive.
But the U.S. withdrawal was more than symbolic. It had real economic consequences. The Trump administration reimposed all previous sanctions and added new ones, targeting Iran's oil exports, banking system, shipping, and key industries like steel and construction. The goal was clear: cripple Iran's economy to force it back to the table on U.S. terms, including giving up its missile program and reducing its role in the region. Washington called it maximum pressure. Tehran called it economic warfare.
Iran's economy, already fragile, went into crisis. Oil exports dropped from over 2 million barrels a day to just a few 100,000. The Iranian currency lost much of its value. Inflation soared, and basic goods became unaffordable for many families. Protests erupted across Iran, not just against the government, but also in anger at the worsening economic conditions. People were stuck between a rock and a hard place, facing both local corruption and international pressure at the same time.
At the same time, the U.S. issued threats to foreign companies, warning them not to do business with Iran or face penalties. Many large European firms pulled out of Iran, afraid of U.S. fines. Even humanitarian goods like medicine became harder to access. Although the U.S. claimed it had allowed exemptions for humanitarian aid, banks and companies were too scared to engage. In the end, Iran's people suffered most. Their hope from the 2015 deal began to fade into frustration and fear.
In response, Iran took a wait-and-see approach at first. They hoped Europe would step up to protect trade through a system called INSTEX, a financial channel designed to bypass U.S. sanctions. But it didn't work as planned. Trade remained frozen. In 2019, after a year of patience, Iran began reducing its commitments under the deal. It started enriching uranium beyond the 3.67% limit increasing its stockpile and installing advanced centrifuges. Step by step, Iran moved further from the original agreement.
Meanwhile, tensions grew rapidly. In June 2019, Iran shot down a U.S. drone, claiming it had entered Iranian airspace. President Trump reportedly ordered a military strike in response, but called it off at the last minute. Later that year, in January 2020, a dramatic escalation occurred. A U.S. drone strike killed General Qasem Soleimani, a top Iranian military leader, near Baghdad airport. Iran responded by launching missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq. The world held its breath, fearing full-scale war.
The region was on fire. Iraq became a battleground for influence. Syria and Yemen remained in chaos. U.S. forces and Iranian-backed groups exchanged attacks, and in the middle of it all, the nuclear issue remained unresolved. The IAEA continued reporting that Iran was breaking the limits set by the JCPOA, but still not fully pursuing a weapon. Diplomats warned that the deal was on life support, barely hanging on. Trust had been broken, and rebuilding it would not be easy.
By 2021, with a new U.S. president in office, Joe Biden, there was hope once again that the deal could be revived. Biden had served as vice president under Obama and supported the original JCPOA. He said he wanted to return to the agreement if Iran returned to full compliance. But after everything that had happened, sanctions, assassinations, broken promises, mutual distrust ran deep. Iran demanded guarantees that no future U.S. president could withdraw again. But legally, that was nearly impossible.
And so negotiations restarted, but slowly. Talks were held in Vienna, but both sides insisted the other move first. Iran wanted all sanctions lifted before returning to compliance. The US wanted Iran to fully follow the deal again before lifting restrictions. The dance of diplomacy resumed, but progress was limited. Some observers began to ask whether the JCPOA could truly be saved, or if the world was simply delaying the next crisis. This brings us back to our main question: peace or just delay?
And while this political drama continues at the top level, ordinary people are still waiting. Iranian students want visas to study abroad. Families want affordable medicine. Business owners want international trade. Meanwhile, other countries watch carefully. If the Iran deal fails completely, what message does that send to North Korea or other nations considering nuclear weapons? Does it say that diplomacy can work, or that it's always one election away from collapse?
So, dear listeners, we now ask you, what do you think of the US withdrawal from the JCPOA? Was it a justified decision to stop a dangerous regime? Or was it a mistake that made everything worse? Should diplomacy be stronger than politics? Can a deal be trusted if one side can walk away so easily? These are difficult questions, and we'd love to hear your answers in the comments. Share your views honestly and kindly. We're building a community that listens and learns together.
In our next section, we'll take a closer look at how Iran's nuclear program has evolved since the U.S. exit. What is Iran's current level of enrichment? How close is it to weapons capability? And what are the world's options now? The deal may be in ruins, but the danger is not gone. In fact, it might be closer than ever. Stay with us as we explore what lies ahead in Section 6, Iran's current nuclear capabilities and the global concern. Now that we've explored the dramatic U.S. withdrawal and the tensions that followed, it's crucial to understand where Iran stands today in terms of its nuclear program. Since stepping away from the 2015 deal's limits, Iran has significantly expanded its nuclear activities. They have increased uranium enrichment levels beyond the original 3.67% to as high as 60%, which is alarmingly close to weapons-grade uranium, usually enriched at around 90%. This rapid enrichment puts Iran closer to the capability of building a nuclear weapon, should it choose to do so.
Yes, Adam, and not only has Iran enriched uranium to higher levels, but it has also increased the number and sophistication of its centrifuges, the machines that spin uranium to increase its concentration of fissile material. Advanced centrifuges can enrich uranium faster and more efficiently than older models, which shortens the so-called breakout time, the period Iran would need to produce enough weapons-grade material. Experts estimate that breakout time has shrunk from about a year during the JCPOA to just a few months today, raising serious alarm among global powers.
Alongside uranium enrichment, Iran has also resumed activities at the Fordo facility, which had been converted into a research center under the original deal. Now, however, Iran is enriching uranium at Fordo again, a clear violation of the JCPOA terms. This site is buried deep underground, making it difficult to target or monitor fully. Moreover, Iran has increased stockpiles of enriched uranium far beyond the limits set in the agreement, giving it more material that could be quickly processed into weapons-grade uranium.
This build-up has intensified worries among countries like the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, who fear that Iran's nuclear advancements could destabilize the entire Middle East. Israel, in particular, has repeatedly stated it will not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons and has hinted at the possibility of preemptive strikes against nuclear sites if diplomatic efforts fail. This creates a highly volatile situation where military conflict could erupt unexpectedly, with devastating consequences for the region and the world.
It's also important to note that Iran has continued to expand its missile program, developing ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear warheads over long distances. While the JCPOA did not address missiles, they remain a critical component of Iran's strategic military capabilities. The international community, especially the US and its allies, has repeatedly called for negotiations that include missile restrictions, but Iran insists that its missile program is non-negotiable and purely defensive.
In this tense environment, the role of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, remains vital. Despite Iran's reduced cooperation in recent years, the IAEA continues to monitor nuclear activities as closely as possible, issuing regular reports on Iran's compliance, or lack thereof, with its commitments. However, Iran has limited IAEA inspectors' access to some sites, increasing the uncertainty and suspicions surrounding its nuclear intentions. This lack of transparency undermines global confidence and makes it harder to find peaceful solutions.
Amidst these developments, the international community faces a difficult dilemma. Some argue that pressure and sanctions should be intensified to force Iran back to negotiations and compliance. Others worry that maximum pressure tactics risk pushing Iran further away from diplomacy, possibly provoking military confrontation. Many experts stress that Iran's nuclear advances are, at least partly, a response to external pressures, creating a vicious cycle that fuels mistrust and escalation.
At the same time, diplomatic efforts are still ongoing. The Biden administration has signaled its willingness to return to the JCPOA framework if Iran returns to full compliance. Talks in Vienna have continued intermittently, involving Iran and the P5+1 countries. However, significant obstacles remain, including demands for mutual trust-building measures, lifting of sanctions, and guarantees against future US withdrawal. Both sides remain cautious, knowing that any misstep could derail negotiations completely.
Meanwhile, regional dynamics further complicate the picture. Iran's alliances with non-state actors like Hezbollah in Lebanon, various militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen contribute to instability and suspicion. Countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council, especially Saudi Arabia, view Iran's regional influence as a threat, increasing the risk of proxy conflicts. This broader context makes any nuclear deal more than just a technical agreement. It is deeply tied to regional power struggles and security concerns.
The stakes are high. Failure to reach a new agreement or maintain restrictions could lead to a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, with other countries possibly pursuing their own nuclear capabilities for deterrence. It could also increase the chances of a military conflict involving Israel, Iran, and their respective allies. The global community must weigh the risks of escalation against the potential benefits of renewed diplomacy, recognizing that the consequences of failure could be catastrophic.
So where does this leave us? Iran's nuclear program is advanced and growing, the geopolitical tensions remain high, and diplomacy is fragile. The question remains, can the world find a way to prevent nuclear proliferation while addressing Iran's security concerns? Or will mistrust, sanctions, and regional rivalries continue to push the situation toward crisis? These are not easy questions, but they are the ones that leaders, experts, and citizens around the world must grapple with.
Dear listeners, at this point, we want to hear from you. What do you think about Iran's current nuclear capabilities? Does the threat justify continued sanctions and pressure, or should diplomacy take precedence? How can the international community balance the need for security with the desire for peace? Share your opinions with us in the comments, and let's keep this important conversation going. Your voice matters in understanding these complex global challenges.
In our next section, we will explore the perspectives of key global players, the United States, European countries, Russia, China, and regional actors, on the Iran nuclear issue today. How do these powers view the current situation, and what strategies are they pursuing? Understanding their interests and positions will help us see the full picture of this complicated and ongoing story. Stay tuned for Section 7, Global Perspectives and Strategies. Now that we understand the current state of Iran's nuclear capabilities, it's important to examine how different global powers view this complex issue. Each country brings its own history, interests, and strategies to the table, and understanding these perspectives helps us appreciate why the Iran nuclear question is so difficult to resolve. Let's start with the United States, which remains a key player. The U.S. sees Iran's nuclear ambitions as a direct threat to regional stability and global non-proliferation efforts. American policymakers are deeply concerned that a nuclear-armed Iran would embolden Tehran to increase its influence through proxies and destabilize the Middle East further.
Exactly, Adam. The U.S. strategy has shifted depending on the administration. Under President Biden, the focus has returned to diplomacy, aiming to revive the JCPOA and create a framework that limits Iran's nuclear program while addressing broader security concerns. However, the Biden administration faces challenges both domestically and internationally. In the US, political divisions make any deal contentious. Republicans generally oppose the JCPOA, arguing it's too lenient, while some Democrats believe a stronger deal is needed to include missile restrictions and regional behavior. This political landscape complicates negotiations and limits flexibility.
Moving on to Europe, the three key players, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have historically supported the JCPOA as the best available tool to prevent nuclear proliferation in Iran. These countries have invested diplomatic capital in maintaining the deal and often act as mediators in ongoing negotiations. They advocate for a balanced approach that combines sanctions relief with strict monitoring and verification mechanisms. Europe also has significant economic interests in Iran and sees the JCPOA as a way to open markets and foster stability. However, the Europeans are frustrated by the U.S. withdrawal in 2018, which complicated their efforts.
Russia and China, the other two permanent members of the UN Security Council involved in the JCPOA, have their own perspectives shaped by strategic interests. Russia views Iran as a valuable regional partner, especially in Syria, where both countries support the Assad regime. Moscow favors a pragmatic approach, encouraging dialogue and opposing military confrontation. China, as a major energy consumer, seeks to secure oil supplies and expand its Belt and Road Initiative, Both Russia and China oppose US unilateral sanctions and advocate for multilateral diplomacy. They have also been critical of the US reimposing sanctions outside UN mandates.
Turning to regional actors, the situation becomes even more complex. Israel remains the most vocal opponent of Iran's nuclear ambitions. Israeli leaders have expressed skepticism about the JCPOA and have reportedly taken covert action against Iran's nuclear facilities. Israel emphasizes the need for strong international pressure and the possibility of military action if diplomacy fails. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states fear Iran's expanding influence and support for proxy groups. They are cautious about any deal that might empower Tehran economically or militarily without addressing these regional security concerns.
On the other hand, Iran's own regional strategy ties its nuclear program to its broader goal of maintaining influence and deterring adversaries. Tehran argues that it needs nuclear capabilities to defend itself against threats, especially from the US and Israel. Iran's leadership often portrays its nuclear activities as a sovereign right and a deterrent rather than an offensive weapon. However, this stance fuels distrust among its neighbors and the international community, which worry about the potential for nuclear weapons proliferation in a highly volatile region.
The competing interests and strategic calculations of these actors create a web of challenges for any peaceful resolution. Trust is scarce, and each side fears that concessions might be exploited. The sanctions that the US and its allies impose are designed to compel Iran to change its behavior, but they also harden Tehran's resolve. Iran's missile program and regional activities are red lines for many countries, yet these are often excluded from nuclear negotiations, limiting the deal's scope. This partial approach leaves many problems unresolved.
This fragmentation makes global coordination difficult. The United Nations remains a forum for debate, but resolutions are often vetoed or diluted by powerful members. Regional organizations have limited influence over Iran's actions, and the broader Middle East lacks mechanisms for sustained security dialogue. In this environment, even well-intentioned diplomacy faces obstacles from mistrust, competing alliances, and domestic politics within each country. Achieving a comprehensive agreement requires not only addressing nuclear issues, but also the broader political and security dynamics of the region.
Given these complex global perspectives, it's clear that the path forward is not straightforward. Some experts suggest incremental confidence-building measures that can pave the way for broader agreements, including limited sanctions relief tied to verifiable actions by Iran. Others argue for a more comprehensive security framework that includes missile limitations and regional conflict resolution. Still, others warn that without a breakthrough, the risk of conflict will continue to grow, possibly dragging multiple countries into confrontation.
So, dear listeners, what do you think about the global strategies around Iran? Should the focus be on reviving the JCPOA as it stands, or is a more comprehensive approach needed? How can the international community balance pressure and diplomacy effectively? And what role should regional actors play in shaping peace and security? Your opinions are invaluable, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. By discussing these questions, we can better understand this complex and urgent issue.
In the next section, we will explore the impact of the Iran nuclear issue on ordinary people, both inside Iran and in the broader region. How does this high-stakes diplomacy affect families, businesses, and communities? What hopes and fears do they carry? Understanding these human dimensions reminds us that beyond politics and strategy, the consequences of this conflict touch real lives every day. Join us in Section 8, The Human Impact of the Iran Nuclear Deal. When we talk about the Iran nuclear deal, it's easy to get caught up in the politics, the sanctions, and the international negotiations. But behind all these complex discussions, there are millions of ordinary people whose lives are directly affected by the outcome. For many Iranians, the deal raised hopes of a better future, hopes for economic recovery, access to medicine, job opportunities, and a chance to connect with the wider world. But those hopes were quickly tested when the U.S. withdrew and sanctions returned, hitting everyday life hard.
Absolutely, Adam. The sanctions that were reimposed in 2018 had a profound impact on the Iranian economy. Inflation soared, making basic goods like food, medicine, and fuel more expensive. For many families, this meant struggling to afford essentials. Access to life-saving medicines became a serious problem despite exemptions in the sanctions. Hospitals faced shortages of vital drugs and medical equipment. Patients with chronic diseases such as cancer or heart conditions found their treatment interrupted or delayed, sometimes with tragic consequences.
The job market also suffered severely. Many small businesses closed as imports became difficult and foreign investments dried up. Young Iranians, who make up a large portion of the population, faced high unemployment and limited prospects. Many dreamt of studying abroad or working internationally, but were held back by economic hardship and travel restrictions. This frustration led to protests and social unrest. As people expressed anger at both their government and foreign policies, they felt powerless to change.
Yet despite these challenges, many Iranians still hold hope for peace and better relations with the world. In urban centers like Tehran, you see vibrant cultural life, music, art, fashion, and a growing interest in technology and education. Many young people use the internet and social media to connect globally, sharing their stories and aspirations. The nuclear deal, for some, symbolized a possible opening to the world, a chance to overcome years of isolation and sanctions. When that hope was dashed, it left a deep sense of disappointment.
The impact is not limited to Iran alone. The broader Middle East also feels the effects of this nuclear issue. Countries like Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen have seen increased instability partly linked to Iran's regional activities. Conflict zones have led to displaced populations, humanitarian crises, and destruction of infrastructure. Ordinary people in these countries live with uncertainty, violence, and hardship. The Iran nuclear deal is often discussed in diplomatic circles, but the human cost of regional tensions is very real.
In Israel, too, the fear of a nuclear-armed Iran deeply affects society. Many Israelis live with the knowledge that regional security depends on preventing Iran from gaining nuclear weapons. This creates a sense of urgency around government policies and defense strategies. Israeli citizens are keenly aware of the risks and often support tough stances on Iran. The shadow of potential conflict shapes daily life, political debates, and military planning.
Similarly, in Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, concerns about Iran's influence drive foreign policy and defense spending. People there also experience the consequences of regional rivalry, whether through proxy conflicts, economic uncertainty, or diplomatic tensions. The Iran nuclear deal's fate influences how these countries view their own security and alliances. For many citizens, this means living in a region marked by fear and competition.
Despite these challenges, people across the Middle East also express a common desire for peace and stability. Families want to live without fear of war. Children deserve education and healthcare. Businesses hope to thrive without the threat of sanctions or conflict. The human impact of the Iran nuclear deal reminds us that beyond politics and strategy, this issue touches lives deeply. It calls on leaders and citizens alike to seek solutions that prioritize human dignity and well-being.
So, dear listeners, as we reflect on these stories from the ground, we ask you, how do you think the human impact should shape policies on Iran's nuclear program? Should humanitarian concerns be more central in diplomatic talks? What hopes do you have for the people living through these challenges? Please share your thoughts and personal stories in the comments. Your voices help us connect the big picture to the human experience behind the headlines.
In our next section, we will dive into the possible futures for the Iran nuclear deal. What are the potential scenarios if diplomacy succeeds or fails? How might new technologies, changing leadership, and shifting alliances affect the outcome? Join us in Section 9, The Future of the Iran Nuclear Deal, Scenarios and Possibilities, as we explore where this long and complicated story might lead.
As we approach the final stages of our discussion, it's essential to look ahead and consider the possible futures of the Iran nuclear deal. The story of the JCPOA has been filled with twists and turns, moments of hope and fear. Now the big question is, what lies ahead? Could diplomacy still succeed and bring lasting peace? Or are we facing an irreversible delay that might lead to greater conflict? The future is uncertain, but by exploring potential scenarios, we can better understand the challenges and opportunities ahead.
That's right, Adam. One optimistic scenario is that negotiations succeed and all parties return to full compliance with the original deal or a strengthened version of it. This would involve Iran rolling back its nuclear program to agreed limits, and in return, sanctions would be lifted or eased, allowing Iran to rejoin the global economy. Such a breakthrough would reduce nuclear risks, ease regional tensions, and open doors for broader diplomatic engagement. It would also signal that sustained dialogue and patience can solve even the most difficult problems.
However, achieving this optimistic outcome is no simple task. Trust must be rebuilt between the US and Iran, between Iran and its neighbors, and among the global powers. Both sides have legitimate concerns and domestic pressures that make concessions politically risky. Iran wants guarantees that future administrations won't abandon the deal again. The US wants to address not only nuclear issues, but also Iran's missile program and regional behavior. Bridging these gaps requires careful diplomacy, flexibility, and time.
Another possibility is a prolonged stalemate, where negotiations drag on without concrete progress. This scenario would mean Iran continues to advance its nuclear program incrementally, while sanctions remain in place and diplomatic relations stay strained. Such a situation risks escalating tensions as mistrust deepens and the likelihood of misunderstandings or accidental conflicts increases. In this scenario, the deal becomes less relevant, and the risk of nuclear proliferation grows. It's a dangerous limbo with no easy exit.
A more pessimistic scenario is that diplomacy completely breaks down, leading to a return to hostile rhetoric, increased sanctions, and possibly even military confrontations. If Iran pushes its nuclear program aggressively and other countries respond with force, the region could spiral into conflict. The consequences would be catastrophic, not only for Iran and its neighbors, but for global security and energy markets. The risk of war would become a daily reality, and years of diplomatic efforts would be lost.
We should also consider technological changes that could influence the future. Advances in nuclear technology, cyber warfare, and missile defense systems could alter the strategic balance. New technologies might make it easier or harder to detect illicit nuclear activities. They might also shift the calculations of regional powers regarding deterrence and defense. This adds an unpredictable layer to the already complex challenge of managing Iran's nuclear ambitions.
Leadership changes in key countries could also shape the outcome. Political transitions in Iran, the United States, or other involved nations may bring new approaches, either opening opportunities for renewed dialogue or hardening positions. Domestic politics, public opinion, and international pressures will all play roles in determining whether diplomacy prevails or fails. The coming years will be critical for shaping policies that affect millions of lives.
Finally, the regional dynamics will remain crucial. Efforts to resolve conflicts in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, and to improve relations between Iran and its neighbors, could create a more stable environment conducive to agreements on nuclear issues. Conversely, ongoing proxy wars and sectarian tensions could undermine any progress. Comprehensive peace and security in the Middle East are deeply intertwined with the fate of the Iran nuclear deal.
So, as we look forward, the future of the Iran nuclear deal is not just about one agreement or one country. It's about global security, regional stability, technological evolution, and human lives. It's a story still being written, with many uncertain chapters ahead. The choices made by leaders and citizens worldwide will shape whether this story leads to peace or prolonged delay, and possibly conflict.
Dear listeners, we want to hear your thoughts on these future scenarios. What outcome do you hope for? What do you think are the biggest obstacles to peace? How can international cooperation be strengthened? Share your views and ideas in the comments. By discussing these possibilities together, we can deepen our understanding and encourage informed dialogue on this critical issue.
In our final section, we'll summarize the key points from today's discussion and reflect on the overall question: is the Iran nuclear deal a path to peace, or merely a delay in a larger conflict? We'll also share some thoughts on what each of us believes is needed moving forward. Stay with us for Section 10. Conclusion: peace or delay? As we arrive at the final part of our podcast, it's time to pause, reflect, and ask ourselves the question we began this journey with. Is the Iran nuclear deal a true path toward lasting peace, or just a temporary delay that postpones inevitable conflict? Over the last 9 sections, we've explored the history of the JCPOA, the motivations of Iran and the United States, the global reactions, the impact on ordinary people, and the uncertain future that lies ahead. Now, in this final section, we want to bring together all those threads and offer a balanced reflection on what this deal really means in today's world.
When the JCPOA was first signed in 2015, it was celebrated as a breakthrough, an achievement of diplomacy in a world full of confrontation. For the first time in years, Iran and the West found common ground. The deal brought temporary relief, not just for governments, but for ordinary Iranians who had suffered under years of economic sanctions. It opened a window of possibility, where peace was no longer a distant dream, but something that could be built step by step through dialogue, transparency, and compromise. But that optimism was short-lived, and the challenges that followed reminded us just how fragile peace can be.
The U.S. withdrawal from the deal in 2018 sent a strong message to the world that international agreements can be reversed by domestic politics, and that trust is not always stronger than partisanship. Iran responded by reducing its compliance with the deal, and the cycle of mistrust began again. For some, this moment marked the end of the JCPOA as a functioning agreement. Others believe it remains alive, damaged, yes, but not beyond repair. What's clear is that the consequences of that withdrawal are still being felt today, regionally, economically, and diplomatically.
One lesson from this entire process is that peace is not a single agreement or moment. It's a long, uncertain journey. Agreements like the JCPOA are not silver bullets. They do not solve every problem, nor do they eliminate risk completely. But what they can do is buy time, reduce tensions, and create space for further dialogue. That's what the original deal achieved, even if only temporarily. Critics argue that the deal delayed rather than resolved Iran's nuclear ambitions, but supporters point out that delay, when used wisely, is not failure. It's strategy.
Yes, and delaying conflict can often be the only way to prevent it. In a world where wars start quickly and end slowly, delaying nuclear escalation, even by a few years, can give diplomacy a chance to work, can save lives, and can help build institutions and relationships that support longer-term peace. If nothing else, the JCPOA reminded the world that talking is better than shooting, and that progress, no matter how slow or imperfect, is better than the destruction of war.
But we must also be honest. The JCPOA never addressed every concern. particularly Iran's ballistic missile program or its involvement in regional conflicts. This led many countries, especially in the Middle East, to view the deal as incomplete or flawed. Future agreements will need to go further, perhaps combining nuclear limits with regional de-escalation frameworks, confidence-building measures between neighbours, and multilateral commitments that involve not just world powers, but also local actors. Peace in the Middle East cannot be achieved by ignoring the voices of those who live there.
Another important lesson is the role of consistency and credibility in foreign policy. When countries make international commitments, those commitments need to survive political transitions. Otherwise, agreements lose value, and partners lose trust. The international system depends on continuity, on knowing that what is signed today will not be undone tomorrow. For the Iran deal, one of the key demands from Tehran today is a guarantee that future U.S. presidents will honor the agreement. Legally, that's a difficult promise to make, but politically, it shows how important trust has become in shaping diplomacy.
The human side of this story cannot be ignored either. For millions of people in Iran and across the Middle East, the debate over uranium enrichment, breakout time, and verification protocols is not theoretical. It affects their economy, their health, their security, and their future. Sanctions hurt families, conflict threatens children, and uncertainty crushes hope. As global citizens, we must push for policies that not only address national interests, but also uplift human dignity and protect the most vulnerable.
And for us, as people discussing these issues from a global platform, we must also reflect on the role of information, education, and public engagement. Too often, foreign policy is kept behind closed doors, discussed in terms that are hard to understand. But the Iran nuclear deal, like climate change, like global health, like war and peace, affects us all. That's why we started this podcast, to make these complex issues accessible, meaningful, and relevant to listeners like you. Because when more people understand what's at stake, they can hold their leaders accountable and shape the future more actively.
So, dear listeners, we end this series with an open invitation. Stay engaged, stay informed, discuss, debate, ask questions, be curious. Whether you live in Tehran or Texas, Beirut or Berlin, the decisions made about this deal affect you. Whether you believe the JCPOA was a victory, a mistake, or something in between, your voice matters. Use it. Share your thoughts with us in the comments. How do you view the Iran nuclear deal? Do you believe peace is still possible? Or has delay made things worse?
This brings us to the final thought of this podcast. The Iran nuclear deal, in all its complexity, is a mirror. It reflects how we as nations handle conflict, how we value diplomacy, and how we prioritize the future. The choice is not only between peace and war, but between cynicism and hope. Do we believe that trust can be rebuilt? That dialogue can be stronger than distrust? That delay, if guided wisely, can be a tool for peace rather than a path to destruction? These are the questions that define our generation and the ones we must answer together.
Thank you for joining us on this long and thoughtful journey through the Iran nuclear deal. We truly appreciate every listener who stayed with us through all 10 sections. If you found this podcast valuable, please give it a like and subscribe to the English Globe on YouTube. Share this with friends who want to understand the world more deeply. And of course, tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? And what do you think about today's topic?
Take care, and we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye, everyone.